Hello and welcome. In today's video I'm going to share with you Ark's 5 strongest creatures, and just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help the channel. In at number 5 is the Gasbags. Now, considering this thing's face and its general overall cuteness, you may not think this is a strong buff creature that is going to get you through a lot of Ark progress. But actually, in fact, this thing is an absolutely insane tank for doing any kind of PvP activity. And it is also a very good harvester of metal and other resources like that, as it has a very reasonable weight stat. So that is a great PvE use if you did want to use it for PvE as well. And on top of all of that, this thing doesn't even need a saddle for you to ride it. The saddle is only there if you need a second player riding on the same Gasbag with you, which is definitely useful if you are playing with a friend. Also, these things do not technically fly, but they are definitely an aerial creature, and their gas flying controls definitely do take a while to get a hang of. And as you can see here, I am not the best at controlling it, and I definitely did get killed a few times when recording the B-roll for this video. Also, if you did want more gas for longer flights, you just need to level up the oxygen stat. One of the few creatures that you actually want an oxygen mutation if you are thinking of breeding one of these things. The Gasbags, like I said before, is an absolutely insane tank, but obviously only once it has blown all of the gas into it, as it is going to give a lot of damage reduction, which is really great for turret soaking, as that is what you're looking for. And if you pair it with something like a snow owl, you can heal the Gasbags quickly after it has been dealt a lot of damage, and quickly get back and do so much more soaking. Also, this thing doesn't just spawn on extinction, you can also find it on Fjorda, which really is a huge bonus for the Gasbag. In at number 4 is the Rex. Now, overall in Ark, the Rex is definitely an essential carnivore that every Ark player should tame at some point, and it really isn't that difficult to tame, as Rexes aren't known for being particularly fast. They are definitely not at Gallimimus levels or Spino levels of speed. You can easily outrun the Rex on foot as long as you're sprinting, but I would definitely recommend putting a few levels into speed just so you can escape its bite radius, as sometimes it can go wrong. But either way, for any Rex taming endeavor, definitely wear flak as well, as you do need to give yourself that armor, so if the Rex does bite you, it is not going to kill you. Because actually one of the worst times to die in Ark is when you are taming a creature, because usually that creature that you were trying to tame is just going to hog outside your death box, and it is just going to stay there, and you won't be able to get your stuff back, and then it will despawn, which is an absolute nightmare, as taming creatures, especially like something such as the Rex, can be really expensive, and all of that time that you spent making narcotics and tranks could go to waste, so definitely be careful. The Rex is an absolutely insane balanced creature which many players use for bosses, and it is definitely the standard kind of creature for breeding and doing bosses on the 100-day Ark series. Definitely a buff, powerful creature worth to tame. In at number 3 is the Kronosaurus. Now, instead of this thing being a great soaker, this thing is just extremely powerful in its damage that it deals. And it also definitely does have a very great health stat as well. Now, you may think, why isn't the Giga on this list? Or why is the Kronosaurus lower on the list than the Giga? Well, just to tell you, the Giga is not on this list, but it would have been in at number 4 before the Kronosaurus came out. The Kronosaurus is just so much better than the Giga in every way, in my opinion, that I think the Giga just doesn't even deserve to be on this list anymore. The Kronosaurus, once its blood rage is full, deals so much more damage than the Giga, and it doesn't have the rage buff as well, which means this thing effectively has more health, as not all of the Giga's health is usable because of that rage meter, at least not all in one go. Also, compared to the Giga, this thing actually does have a reasonable stamina stat as well. The Giga's stamina is absolutely atrocious, and its drain is so fast, but with the Kronosaurus, the drain really isn't too bad, and unlike the Giga, this thing also has some speed as well. But the downside is its taming method is a bit buggy sometimes, but once you get over that hurdle, you have yourself an insanely powerful, strong carnivore. In at number 2 is the Reaper King. Now in this B-roll you may notice this is a Reaper Queen. I'm sorry about that, I just had a Reaper Queen at hand. You can't tame Reaper Queens, but it is still a Reaper, so you get the general gist. The Reaper deals an absolutely insane amount of damage. When it comes to damage, these things definitely do pack a punch, and they can wipe through so many creatures, and with their wealth of attacks, these things are definitely very versatile fighters, and they are actually very reasonable turret soakers as well. But also you may think the Reaper is a late game tame, and to that I would definitely agree for Arboration. But on Genesis Part 2, the Reaper King can actually be your first tame. Yes, before you can even get yourself a hand on a dodo, you can get yourself the Reaper King. Raasclark has a great tutorial on how to do it, and I will link it in a pinned comment in the description down below if you did want to check it out. Overall, the Reaper Queen is just a really cool, insane creature that really shouldn't be messed with unless you're obviously trying to tame one. And to tame it, what you'll need to do is get a Reaper Queen to a really low amount of health, then it will impregnate you, the character, and you will raise the Reaper baby. And finally, in at number 1 is the Rock Elemental. These things really are the beasts of all creatures when it comes to tanks. These things are by far one of the best tanks in Ark. It's just sad how hard these things are to tame and how expensive these things are to tame as well. Also, sorry about there not being a saddle on the Rock Elemental. You're just going to have to cope with the amazing realism that Ark does have. The Rock Elemental is a very difficult tame, like I said, but it is definitely worth it for the absolute tank of a creature and the absolute beast of a creature when it comes to its damage. Just look how quickly it killed that Deathworm. This is actually a very viable creature if you did want to get some really good mantises, as it is a really easy way to get those Deathworm horns. But back to its taming method, this thing you will have to shoot cannons right into its face, and then it will be knocked out, and then from there it's relatively simple. Just feed it any kind of mineral. But if you didn't know already, cannons are really expensive. Ark's easiest creatures that are actually still worth taming. In at number 5 is the Carb Enemies. Now these things are actually a great start if you want a very simple underwater tame. Yes, this thing is not going to put up a fight against most creatures that you'll find under the water, but just for some oil gathering or for some gathering of some silica pearls, these things are great, as you do not even need to go into the ocean to get one of these things, and they can be tamed with something as simple as a slingshot. I wouldn't recommend going as far to fists. A slingshot and a club maybe are a good shout, but I'd probably say go for the slingshot, as you want to keep a bit of range, as in the earlier stages of the game, the Carb Enemies can very easily kill you, and the last thing you want is to end up with just broken bones, and you just ending up dying when you're just trying to tame something so that you can gather oil and other resources that you find in the ocean. Also, for any PvP players out there that may be in my audience, these things are great for doing any kind of turret soaking, anything at all. Yes, you're not going to get something like rider protection like the Stego offers, but you're going to give yourself a window into turret soaking and also they are actually quite good for Noglin Tames as well, but that doesn't really matter for a PvP scenario. These things will give you great turret soaking performance as they have so much damage reduction, and actually you'll probably notice that by how many rocks these things take from slingshots, but they are definitely worthy soakers for you to bring on raids early on. In at number 4 is the Pteranodon. The Pteranodon is found everywhere on Ark, and it is pretty much accessible on every Ark map, minus Genesis Part 1 and Arboration, where flyers are simply banned, even though you can find Pteranodons on Genesis Part 1, but you can't ride them unless you use a string of commands, which I'll not go into because console players do not have any kind of access to it. The Pteranodon can be found usually in beach areas. They usually tend to go near water areas, and they are tamed very simply with a very simple knockout tame, and you can bowler these things as well. So you can simply go to a Pteranodon once it's landed, bowler it, and just whack it with a club. I wouldn't recommend a slingshot for this one. This is definitely a club tame. So once you have whacked this thing with a club, then it is just as simple as feeding it a bit of meat, and you've got yourself a flyer, which is really an essential thing in Ark. The only thing is, its saddle is a little bit on the expensive side than what you may be used to. It is unlocked at level 38, and you may not have chitin or keratin readily available to you. For that, you'll need to kill any kind of insects, or actually the Carb Enemies, which was the creature that was on the list just before the Pteranodon. In terms of my PvP audience as well, the Pteranodon has a use there as well. It's not just a great PvE creature. The Pteranodon's PvP uses include these things are actually pretty good for raiding bases and scouting areas as well, as they are one of Ark's fastest flyers, which means you can quickly get out of any situation quickly, and their sea attack spin ability is really useful for raiding bases. In at number 3 is the Bionics. The Bionics is definitely an essential Ark tame that every player needs, and I urge every player to actually tame one of these things, as they are so useful for pretty much everything on Ark. Firstly, the Bionics is just such a good carnivore, and it is definitely worth it. Its health is relatively high, it's got a good stamina stat, which is really welcome, and its damage is definitely something to not overlook. It can easily plow through a lot of creatures in Ark, and a good high level one would probably be able to take something out like a Titanosaur or a Giga or a Kronosaurus. But maybe don't take these things into bosses, as although their health stat is still really good, it is not really going to stack up in some boss fights, especially something like the Dragon on the Island or the Master Controller on Genesis Part 1. Also, the Bionics' main use, its main use is an absolutely insane caving creature. And with its sea attack, spin ability and water, this thing is definitely a viable creature for doing underwater caves as well, which on the island there are 2. And actually this makes this thing a great underwater creature as well. Far better than the Carb Enemies. It is a little bit harder to tame, but with a net gun, if you do have access to that, these things really aren't that bad, and with a simple trap, they're not bad either. But compared to the Carb Enemies, these things can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon. They can actually fight back, and they deal a reasonable amount of damage, and they are a lot faster than the Carb Enemies. And if you have been with the Carb Enemies for a little bit, you know they are a little bit on the slow side. In at number 2 is the Deinonychus. Now this is the first time on the list that you don't even need any trank arrows to raise this thing. You're simply going to need your hands, which you already spawn with in Ark, and probably a couple campfires. And you may ask, why do I need campfires for a tame? What is that even going to do? Well, actually, you don't tame this thing really per se. You actually find its eggs in the wild, simply steal it, and then raise it, which is where the campfires will come in. And then you may need some resources to go through imprinting, but it is not necessary for its tame. Now the Deinonychus, unlike the Baryonyx, is a really great boss tame, and it probably isn't that bad for caves as well, except sometimes it is a little bit too wide. I know it doesn't seem like it would be, but sometimes it is a bit wide to fit into those tighter areas of caves. Now the Deinonychus is definitely a pack creature, and it will benefit from that pack buff like so many other Ark creatures have. For example, the Allosaurus uses that same buff as well, and it will just buff all of the creatures that are in the pack. The minimum number of dinos in a pack, if you didn't know already, is 3. Also, once you have yourself a good pair of male and female Deinonychuses, you can simply breed these things and you never have to steal another egg again. And also, these things are great for doing boss fights, as their bleed ability actually carries into the boss fight, which is OP. And finally, in at number 1 is the Reaper. Now you may think, what the hell, this is not the easiest creature to tame in Ark that is actually worth taming. Why is this thing in number 1? And in fact, if you're on Arboration, that would be precisely right. These things are definitely not an easy tame on Arboration. But on Genesis Part 2, these things are a tame which can literally be your first tame. And that isn't because the taming method is easier. You still have to take these things to under 1,000 health and then get impregnated by them. But the way you can deal that damage is so much easier on Genesis Part 2. And since you have the tech suit readily available to you, you can quickly get out of the way once you have been impregnated, and while luring the actual Reaper into the toxic gas, which will actually deal the damage to the Reaper Queen, which will allow you to tame it with so much ease. Sadly, this is only accessible on Genesis Part 2, and if you don't have that, you will not have access to the Reaper unless you have Arboration, or if you just don't have any DLC at all. But the thing is, the Reaper is just so good of a tame. It was definitely worth putting this thing on the list, and if you do want to know about this taming method, go check out Raasclark's guide. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed. Also, comment your top 5 in the description down below, and tell me, will you try out that Reaper taming method? And I will see you all later. Bye.